Mike Cintolo, Chief Analyst of Cabot Growth Investor and Cabot Top 10 Trader. I'm here with your Cabot Weekly Review, recording this late Friday morning on May 30th. So it's been an up week for the market, and a couple of big cap indexes did sort of nose to new recovery highs earlier this week. But for the most part, just about every index, a lot of stocks, most stocks, have just been consolidating here now for 2 weeks, okay? And the good news is so far so good. I mean, the consolidation's been very tight. Of course, there's been a pothole here and there with individual stocks, earnings reports or whatnot, but the vast majority of names are consolidating tightly, if not kind of creeping higher over the past couple of weeks. And all of our intermediate term indicators, whether it's trend or growth versus defense or broad market, are still positive. So that's all to the good, okay? Longer term trend had a chance to turn positive last week. It didn't quite do it. It could do it next Friday, so I don't want to make too much out of it, but that is sort of a small, hasn't quite flipped yet sort of thing. And again, with leadership, after a 2-month topping phase, falling 20 or 25%, and then coming, say 80% of the way back, as we've seen in the market, I wouldn't expect to see a lot of new highs. So I'm not holding it against the market, but I still want to see more stocks, especially institutional quality stocks, not just speculative names on, an executive order or something like that. Some institutional quality stocks really perk up, break out, and engage, and follow through after that to tell you that the big investors are really engaged. So far, so good, like I said, and we continue to do a little bit of buying step by step, but really what I want to see is this consolidation continue to remain fairly tight, maybe a shakeout here or there, but remain tight. And then when we get going to see, a bunch more stocks, like I said, breakout, especially of the institutional quality variety. In Cabot Growth Investors Model Portfolio, we did a little buying this week. We're still 37% in cash, though. I could do a little bit more buying, but I'm not just going to keep putting, 10, 15% of money to work until now we see some stocks break out on the upside. The setup is there. The big picture looks good. Like I said, most of the evidence certainly is positive. We just want to see the actual stocks get going here, ideally with the market in the weeks ahead. Okay, let's hop into the charts. As usual, I'm using a product called Market Surge. You can learn more at marketsurge.com. It's a product of Investors Business Daily. So you can see the NASDAQ here on the NVIDIA earnings report Wednesday night into Thursday. It kind of popped up here. It met some selling. I mean, net, we're just kind of consolidating in here. And when you step back, we had a hell of a run, even just from here. The NASDAQ went up, probably 3,000 points more. And so far, it's been consolidating in a few 100-point range. That's exactly what you want to see. Doesn't mean we can't, doesn't mean you can't come in here and, there's more of this U.S.-China trade thing or whatever, rumors, interest rates, whatever it is. Doesn't mean we can't pull back more, maybe test, some of these moving averages or, there's a big gap here. I know people like to look at that stuff. So it's possible, but overall, so far, so good here. And, most important to me, there's still a lot of daylight here for our intermediate term measure. We look at the lower of the two moving averages, which is the 50-day right now. So in theory, I wouldn't want to see the NASDAQ down here. Don't get me wrong. I think that would be a little iffy. But the point is that it's holding tight and there is plenty of daylight to wiggle around here, another week or two or three if the market wanted to, okay? Now the big cap indexes, here's the S&P 500, do look the best here. I would say I'm not I've said this 100 times, probably more. I'm not a big support and resistance guy on the indexes. It just doesn't, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. To me, it doesn't provide an edge. I will say that there is, this kind of topping phase from December, January into February. There is overhead here to deal with. So, we'll see how it goes. Maybe that's going to be an issue for some of these indexes. But so far, like I said, so good. Positive on the S&P 500, holding very well. New York, just running through the indexes. New York Composite looks very similar, holding very well near its highs. The broader indexes, of course, are, lagging in that sense, but intermediate term basis still clearly positive, well above the 50-day line. And again, compared to the, the prior run here, this sort of consolidation looks very normal. Okay, IJR small caps bringing up the rear, but we'll see how it goes. Again, positive on an intermediate term basis. And the same thing too, it's everything's pretty much in gear. Yes, like I said, the big cap indexes kind of snuck out on Thursday morning, but on an intermediate term basis, what I like here is it's not like you know, these three indexes look great, but these two are terrible, and you know, that sort of thing. Everything's pretty much in gear, which tends to happen, tends to be a healthy sign. Okay, this is the ARK fund, you know, just kind of same sort of thing. It's below its highs, but on an intermediate term basis, positive and holding very well. IBD 50 index, same sort of thing. It's actually been kind of creeping higher here, despite the market's consolidation. Weaker overall than the market for sure, but again, trending up on intermediate term. IPO fund, same sort of thing, okay? Consolidation in here, even among the sectors. I mean, just, you know, this is the industrials, you know, very nice run. You know, everything's just has a similar chart. Some are a little bit higher in their base, some are lower, but on an intermediate term basis, this is the financials, XLF, they all look pretty similar. So, like I said, I mean, this is a long way of saying so far so good, okay? Just running through a couple things before stocks. You know, XLP, it's behaving, meaning it's not doing much, which I like to see. You know, if we did start to get something like this going and the market was soft or consolidating, I would note it in one of these videos. Not that it would be the be-all, end-all, but it certainly would be something I'd watch. But overall, there certainly hasn't been any rush into defensive names. And then just looking back at interest rates, we talked about it last week, and I wrote about it in this week's Cabot Growth Investor, how, you know, the 30-year note, this is the 30-year note, hit a new high. The rate hit a new high, which is, quote, bad, although it's backed off pretty good. But when you look at like the benchmark 10-year note, it's, you know, this is still the 10-year note. It's not like we're looking at the 1-year note or something like that. It's still the benchmark note. And, you know, it never came close to its high, and it's faded here. So just to me, rates look under control. Rates tend to swim together, usually. Sometimes you get the yield curve doing all sorts of stuff. So if they got together on the upside, I think that could be a negative. But so far, it's more mixed than anything and neutral. I mean, it's not like rates are plunging through the floor. But, you know, when you just look at this sort of consolidation, if this was a stock, you would just say it's kind of in no man's land. It's just kind of sitting in the middle of everything, okay? The other thing I wanted to just mention is, because I have gotten a lot of questions on this, there's a decent amount of believe it or not, there's a decent amount of speculative names working. And to me, it's more, I don't think speculation like sentiment is that high. What I do think is that when things are a little thinner or momentum oriented, people are trying to gun them and make some profits, okay? And sometimes there's some news behind it or some real fundamentals there. So I'm not saying all these are complete, you know, lottery tickets or whatever. But this is Oklo, I think that's how you pronounce it, OKLO. This is one of the, you know, nuclear names. You know, the stock had I mean, you just look at it. It went from, you know, high 20s to 60, back to 17, now it's back to 55 and all that. This is not, I don't play these because eventually, you know, if you're a trader, go for it. But eventually these things will kind of come back down. I'm not saying this thing's going to go back down to $3 or whatever, but you're talking about something with literally no revenue at this point. If you want to play it, that's fine. You know, try to get in on pullbacks, small positions, cut the loss if, you know, if things don't go well. But we're just seeing I'm seeing a decent amount of these sort of names going. You know, QBTS is quantum computing. You remember that? Remember it had this run, then it cracked, and then it had this run, and it cracked, and now it's had this run. Okay, it's got something like $20 billion in revenue and a $5 billion market cap. For all I know, this stock, you know, it's at $16. For all I know, this thing goes to $50. I don't know, but we're just seeing a lot of these as opposed to, which is good. And if you can play them, I'm all for it. I'm very, you know, if you can make money on it, fantastic. But there's not as many like institutional quality names like this. Like if this was some big liquid chip stock or whatever, software stock, you know, that was doing something like this, even doing half like this, I'd say, ooh, wow, that's really attractive. But there's just a lot of these sort of news-driven, rumor-driven, a lot of hope and that sort of thing. Can go a lot higher. I'm not negative on them. I'm just saying we're seeing a lot of that. Okay, GameStop is always kind of like the ultimate. They started buying Bitcoin, and the stock, you know, ran up. This is far less dramatic, but, you know, ran up 20% and then kind of right back down. Okay, just something to be aware of. It's not my thing. If you want to play them, that's fine. I got a lot of questions on the nuclear stocks. I would just keep it small, try to buy on dips, use a loose leash. And, you know, if things do fall apart, just make sure, you know, you don't get too hurt on those. And hopefully they continue going higher. You can make a few bucks on the side, okay? In terms of potential leaders, you know, or current leaders, all right? Today we see Viva Systems. Yesterday was Viva Systems, VEEV. This one was a great, just to look at the monthly, this was a huge, great winning growth stock when cloud software was really in gear, really in favor. And then it got hit during the bear market, and it really hasn't been. You can see on the weekly chart, it's been growing. You can see the earnings lines kind of cranking ahead at, I don't even know, 20% a year, 15%. The stock hasn't really done that much though, but now maybe it's changing character. I would note that it had a huge volume clue, whatever that was, 3 months ago on earnings, a nice volume clue at the market lows, and then of course this week on earnings. So that's kind of interesting to me. I don't think it's going to be your fastest horse, but growth is accelerating. It's picking up. It looks pretty good. Did want to mention CRWV. Mike, you just talked about these stocks that are that are going up and super speculative. I'm putting CRWV in a separate category. First of all, they have almost $1 billion in revenue in the March quarter. So this is not some no revenue, super speculative name. And of course, it's trading. I'm sure a lot of this is traders, but it's trading 20 million shares a day at 100, so $2 billion a day. It's very liquid, okay? Now, when I look at this, obviously the stock has gone from, it's doubled, basically. It broke out and call it it's doubled, round numbers. Now it's finally hitting a little resistance. My thought is, number one, it's not at an attractive entry point, but number two, it's probably not over either. So I'm just bringing it up to keep an eye on it. It's on my watch list. I wouldn't say it's anything immediate, but if it's a couple weeks from now and the stock's chilling out and the moving averages are catching up and maybe say the markets, had shaken out a little bit and starting to emerge from this consolidation, could be an opportunity. So CRWV, just something to keep an eye on. Certainly new merchandise, certainly liquid. Clearly institutions are buying it. So we'll see how it goes. It's a hot potato, but looks good. NRG Energy is a power play, one of these electricity companies. Also made some acquisitions. Very resilient here during the correction, hit a higher low or at least a equal low. Nice earnings gap. And now this is going to be the second straight week if we close today, but you can just see a very nice tight range in here. Doesn't mean it can't pull back more, but certainly a nice chart in there. Sometimes with these, I'm not giving you specific levels, but the top of if it sort of follows through and lives up here for a bit like this one has, sometimes the top of the gap, this is your big earnings gap right here, sometimes the top of the gap can be a logical, loss limit or stop point. Doesn't mean it can't nose below there by a couple dollars, but I'm just talking generally speaking. So I'm not saying you go buy it and use that as a stop. Maybe it does that on Monday for all I know, but so far the chart certainly looks good. We've talked about aerospace a lot. This is Boeing. It's, I'm more of a growth guy. This is definitely a turnaround situation, but it's been, out of favor for a while. The company hasn't been executing well. You can just see it's been all through last year, hit a new low during the correction, but it looks like it's changed character. There is overhead here. I'm not going to sit here and say Boeing is now, it's the next NVIDIA or whatever, but this is a very, very nice persistent move. Nice big volume in here. Obviously, it's a liquid stock. It just continues to act well. And again, the last couple of weeks, for the most part, just about every leading or potential leading name has been consolidating, very well, very tightly so far. And Boeing is certainly one of those. It's a little bit different flavor, but I definitely think this one, if aerospace continues to do well, I think Boeing probably will too. Palantir, it's having a good day so far today. You're not in the first inning here with some of these names. Some of these names have come back, obviously. So you got to keep that in mind. You're not in the first inning of the move. At the same time, you have to I personally like to put more weight on the recent action. It had a big, the market had a huge plunge, and this was able to come back from it. And again, you just kind of had this nice consolidation here with a 25-day moving average catching up. So it looks like ideally a good, ideally it's ready to make its next move, but certainly a nice pattern there. Snowflake, I think we mentioned this last week, but nice gap here. There is some old overhead here from, I think it's 15 months ago. But this clue right here, we're seeing some of these things had clues last year that they were changing character. They started to do okay. You can see Snowflake sort of built this base, but then the market collapsed. So it got pulled back down. But now as soon as the market's done, finished up its correction, we think, the stock's been off to the races here. So nice earnings gap. And so far, it's still early in here. But so far holding that gap, it's not like giving up ground. It's holding that gap very well. Insulet, medical stocks have been, I got caught with a couple. We had one for a while, but, Penumbra, which I was very high on, I've mentioned here. And still eventually, this is not the end of the world here with something like Penumbra. Maybe it eventually gets going. But, Penumbra, TGTX, I was very high on, got hit on earnings, acted well throughout the market downturn, big sales and earnings growth, big drug on the market, that sort of thing. So I'm a little gun shy with the medical names. I will say, though, Insulet really acts completely under control. Here's your earnings gap, follow through the next day. And it's actually been kind of creeping higher a little bit in the last couple of weeks, even though the market's consolidated. So PODD looks good. Duolingo's, this is a tough name because it tends to have these, as I'll show you, it tends to have these sort of moves. I guess this one was abbreviated, but then eventually it chops around and gets hit. Then it had this big move and it got hit with the market. And now it's come back to life. So it's definitely more of a dip thing. But again, kind of like Palantir, it's kind of chilled out here. The 25-day line catches up. That can be I don't want to say it's a great entry point, but it can be a good entry point or an area of support, I guess is probably the better way to put it, in stronger environments when a stock's very strong, kind of consolidates here and lets off some steam. Duolingo looks pretty good. A lot of foreign names, believe it or not, even Asia and stuff, and even Chinese. This is Coupang, nice double bottom base, kind of like an Amazon over there. Broke out on earnings a couple of weeks ago. I love the two big volume weeks back to back. Sometimes call those double skyscrapers. I wouldn't say this was the biggest signal of all time or anything, but CPNG clearly acts well. C Limited, this is kind of like Palantir in the sense that it's already had a move here, so you're not in the first inning, but it certainly handled the correction relatively well. It got hit, of course, but held the 200-day line better than 85% of stocks or whatever. And it's been very nice since then with a good earnings reaction. And again, the last couple of weeks, nice and tight up there. Okay. Natural gas, not my favorite play, but CRK certainly looks like the leader. And a lot of the charts are kind of shaping up. Good cash flow. Maybe it's a play on the AI, energy demand. Again, nice tight consolidation in here the last couple of weeks. EXE, Expand Energy, not quite as strong as CRK, but still pretty good, hitting new highs, which is pretty rare these days for anything. Hitting new highs and in this sort of modest uptrend. So just a different thing. And last but not least, I'll mention this. I think this has earnings next week. This is GuideWire. Yeah, this has earnings June 3rd, whatever that is. I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday. This is GuideWire. Again, not to keep repeating myself, but it did have a good run, but it has had this nice consolidation here for, 6 months or so. It did hold the 200-day line, showed resilience during the correction, came back. Now you just kind of have this nice, call it a handle, call it a shelf, call it whatever you want, consolidation heading into earnings. Obviously there's kind of resistance in this area, so if it can take that out, probably a good thing. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, back to the market. I sort of made the silly sports analogy in Cabot Growth Investor this week where it's like, say your team's down by a few points, football team's down by a few points late in the fourth quarter, and they force a fumble, recover it. They drive from, their own 20 to the other team's 30. They need a touchdown, but so far, so good is just how I'm looking at it. But you still need to score a touchdown, and that's kind of where I'm at with a lot of the market right now and leadership. There's some names working. We going over them every week. There are a few more names emerging like VEEV and Snowflake. The last couple of weeks gapped on earnings. And most things, the number of breakdowns and stuff is relatively small, okay, during the last 2-3 weeks. But now we just want to see the market and more leadership sort of emerge here. And if we can kind of consolidate in here and get going, and that's joined with a bunch more breakouts, not just like 2 or 3, big cap stocks, but a bunch of breakouts across various areas of growth or, even commodities, stuff like that. I think that would really bode well. So far, so good. I'm optimistic, but just want to see more here as we go forward. All right, that's all the time I have for today. As always, thanks for listening. Be sure to come by again next week for another Cabot Weekly Review.